Today's a little bit different of an episode. We have a guest on. His name is Tom, and he's not super familiar with the manual, but he is a podcast listener. So if there's any of you out there, maybe you can relate. And he's the pastor of another local community church here. We're happy to have him on. Welcome to the 3D Disciples podcast, where we're working together to develop disciples who display God's love as we deploy into God's world. Join us on this journey by liking, subscribing, and following this channel. I'm your host, Hannah, and alongside us is the pastor of FBC Clarion, Jason Hunter. May Jesus help us climb to new heights. Welcome to the podcast, Tom.
Hello, Hannah.
Yep, it's Tom at the far end. Jason's in the middle, and I'm your host, Hannah, here on the end. Anybody who's watching online, if you're listening, it doesn't matter where we're sitting to you at all. Or the fact that we're all wearing long sleeves because it's getting cold out. That's just the nature of weather here in Clarion. So, Tom, we really appreciate you coming on and being willing. You're one of our first guests kind of outside of our church window. So what made you decide to be willing to come on?
Well, Jason asked if I was the first one, but it was... I've been a listener, long-time listener, first-time caller type of thing. But
that's good.
It's been a phenomenal journey, just kind of following along with what you guys have been taking the church through, and every time Jason and I got to see each other, which hadn't been until recently because of your schooling, we hadn't gotten that much interaction. But when I'd see you, I'd say, "Hey, I've been following the podcast, really enjoyed this," or I had a question about something, and so he said, "Hey, would you like to, still interested in getting you on the podcast?" And I said, "Oh, great." He said, "This Wednesday at 8." And I was like, "Oh, okay, this quick." So, here we are.
Yeah. So everybody knows Tom. It's Tom Switzer. He's the pastor at Grace Community. I always want to say Grace Baptist, but that's not right. No. Grace Community out of Sligo. Is that your? Yeah. It's the official address. Yeah, it's in a little town called Curlsville, but it's a Sligo mailing address.
Were you guys part of? I did a Grace Youth Retreat. Do you guys still do that? I think that's through you guys. At all? I don't know. We've done
the last couple of years. We've done one.
It used to be over at the Mahoning Bible Church or something. I don't know.
Yeah. We've done a few there.
Do you have like a gym inside your church?
No.
Okay, maybe it wasn't different Grace.
I mean, we use it like it's a gym, but others call it the sanctuary.
Oh. So it's a little untraditional, where it doesn't have like pews and everything in it.
It has pews. Yeah,
okay.
We just
use it like a gym. Jason threw a football in our pews one time. So
almost missed.
I'm sorry, Jason, I cut you off.
That's all right.
What else are you going to say about
just who Tom is. He's I don't know if I've mentioned ever the League of Pastors. It's a group of pastors here in Clarion that get together every week and pray together. 10 of us, 8 or 10 churches.
Depending on the week,
Depending on the week represented right now. So he's a member of the League of Pastors, a good friend, avid hunter. So we talk about hunting quite a bit. And I knew he'd started following the podcast. And so I thought it'd be a good chance for us to get some outside perspective, like you said. Help us see this from a different angle.
Yeah, so that's like my first question is like, how were you introduced to this 3D journey that we're on at FBC?
Oh, well, I went through the League of Pastors. We were discussing different events happening inside our churches and things that we can celebrate that God's doing inside the walls of our own individual churches. And Jason mentioned, hey, we're kicking off this discipleship journey. An element of that will be a podcast that we're going to be putting out. And I love podcasts. I don't listen to music at all, except for what my kids want to listen to, and which is like Wheels on the Bus and weird other songs that's randomly cool to a second grader, Yeah. And I'm podcast exclusively, and so I was pumped to listen to it. So I started listening to it and just kind of following along, and every time a new one pops on, I catch it.
So right before we started recording, I actually asked you if you've ever even have you seen the manual at all? Have you opened it up before?
Jason gave me one. I leafed through a little bit, and it's I've got a stack yay big of books I need to get to, and it's in that stack.
Yeah, but you're benefiting just from the conversations, like not even the supplement. Because my questions usually come from there's a sermon, there's notes in my manual, and then I come up with the questions for the podcast. So it's not even a supplement to you. It's like this is free information.
I mean, I catch a sermon sometimes because one of the realities of being a pastor that they just don't prepare you for a whole lot in seminary.
There could be a whole class on what seminary didn't prepare you for.
Yeah, or I think there's a few books about it, but even that probably falls short. But one of them is I felt a real hole in my life because I've grown up since I was about first grade going to church, and my parents had me in church every week since first grade, and I went to Christian college and in church every week, and then I began pastoring, and I feel a deficit, and I'm realizing I'm not getting to take in a sermon at all.
Oh,
like I'm presenting, but I'm never being built into. Mm-hmm. And so I started actually listening to Matt Chandler down in Texas and listened to his stuff. But then I got connected to these guys, so I try and take in one of their sermons weekly, or if I can, just to try and. So every now and then I catch one of yours and dig in. So it's just an opportunity. So I'm catching it that way, and I'm kind of coming into the podcast with fresh eyes and just listening to what you had to say. But
did you relate to anything? We had an episode, maybe you haven't heard it, where I asked Jason's questions about like basically just what it's like to be a pastor. Did you relate to any of that? Or
when
did
was
you
that
hear
one?
That was first season, so that would have been.
Yeah, it was the first
some
season.
time ago now.
I probably listened to it and forgot it already.
Well, I'm going to ask you one of them from it.
Yeah.
Which is there anything of views of yours that have changed, like since you've graduated seminary, where you were like staunch, like, okay, this is how it's supposed to be, but now that you're out here living in the world?
When I graduated, I knew everything wrong with evangelicalism and how to fix it.
And you were just waiting for somebody to ask.
Right, yeah. And if they didn't, I would just go ahead and breach the subject. But a good friend of mine, his name's Jason. He's down in Virginia, and he actually came up and was the camp speaker. We did a youth retreat just a few months ago, and he was the speaker for that. And I actually pushed him so hard that I put him on anxiety medication.
Oh my!
Yeah, I could be rabid if I want something, you know. And so it was really that softening of I don't have all the answers, or yeah, I can see where a boat needs turned, but let's take 5 years and turn that, and not let's do it in one conversation, you know. And so it's that kind of like softening of my approach to things really is a big piece of it, and how I structure the way I plan sermons and the way I structure how I approach the people in the church, and you know, just different things of the more the nuts and bolts of ministry has changed, just because it's not what they taught us it would be, you know, and they didn't do a lot of teaching on here's what it's going to look like to do ministry. There was no class on you're going to fall in love with these people and then bury some of them. Like there was just no class on that, you know, like there was nothing that really ever prepared you for. So a lot of it was I'd say a lot of what I learned was how to pick my teeth up. You know, like you get hit and you get picked. How do I pick this back up and continue faithfully?
Yeah, a lot of seminaries, what I talk about, is, I use this phrase kind of like this ivory tower mentality. Like, and the seminarians they get this idea like they're getting, you know, they're learning to read Greek and they're learning to read Hebrew and they're learning how to exegete, you know, and how, you know, and homiletics and all, you know, all these big fancy words that they can come up with. You know, they got their eschatology and they got their ecclesiology and they got all these things, you know, and they're like, there's this world of hungry people out there that are just waiting for me to get there and share all this knowledge with them, you know, and they're just going to be like, you know, like, oh, you're so great, help us to really learn the Bible. And then you get to a church and you go like, no, that's not the way it is. They're not just like pour into us your wisdom that you've gained over these years. That's just, you know, it's real people. Most of them think they know more than you already. Most of them are older than you. Most of them have lived lives, and they're like, oh yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean that reminds me of another question that I had asked was like, the expectations that the church has of you is different than what like you expect to give them. I don't know, it just was different. Like those expectations, like one of the heaviest things for you guys. Yeah,
if you have 100 people in your church and you hand them all a piece of paper and say, write down my job description, you're going to get 120 answers. You know, it's just everyone has a different expectation, and managing those expectations is tough, for sure. and it's a difficult role. And that's what someone just recently asked, like, about my calling, and I was like, I don't necessarily see that scripturally. I see the calling is to follow Jesus, and he's going to walk me where he desires. Like when Jesus showed up, he said, "Hey, follow me," and that was all the calling that we needed. What I do realize is there's literally nothing else I could be doing. Like I look at other jobs, and I've worked in other jobs, and there's literally nothing else I could be doing than vocational ministry. Like,
and there's your calling.
Yeah, right.
And there's your sign.
Right. Yeah, and that's it. You know, I went to Clarion University here for a year for phys ed because I thought I want to work with students. I don't care for math that much, so this is the place that I can get involved and not do math and
still
work
be
with students,
children,
you know, and we can play dodgeball and life will be good.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a year, absolutely hated it, and then ended up at Liberty University with going for ministry. And people would say, "What's your backup plan?" I'm like, there isn't one. So I'm just going to do what Jesus is asking me to do and chase that down. So.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Jason, do you want to ask one of
Sure.
your questions?
So one of the things we often talk about is, especially within our league and that kind of stuff, so kind of just give your opinion, your view of what the state of discipleship. Discipleship's a big, buzzword within the church world right now. That everybody's writing about discipleship and talking about discipleship, but just kind of give us, and obviously 3D disciples and discipleship journey and all that kind of stuff. Trying to phrase everything in that. So kind of give us your view of discipleship in the state of the church right now.
It's struggling. I'd say most of your pastors, whether it's coming out of seminary or have been in the work for a while, aren't certain they've ever seen a good model of discipleship played out in their own view, let alone their own ministry. So we're struggling, and I think discipleship requires a pretty high pain tolerance. If you're going, and that's something that, like for me, I've told our church is I have no desire to find myself serving somewhere else. I want to put 30 or 40 years in here, disciple you along, and retire. Like when I always say, like, and I get a few people fired up when I say this, but like when I'm getting a little senile and I've got a funny smell, shove me out the door, and bring the next faithful servant in. And so that's kind of the heart is to sit down and do a long time with these people. And if you are spending all of your time at barbecues with healthy sheep, you aren't doing any discipleship. Discipleship, you're in the gutter with rough folk and really spending some time trying to pull people out of the pit of humanity. All the while, I think it's James talks about, like, don't fall in that pit yourself.
Right. Right.
And so discipleship has, like I said, it just requires a high pain tolerance. Like you're gonna get kicked around a lot.
Amen to that.
Well, and I admire that thought. One of the things that I realized, they have all these marks of what makes a good pastor or a healthy church, depending on what you look at. And pastor tenure is one of those things. And I decided really early on, that's the one thing that I have the most control over.
Yeah.
Is staying and being faithful. And I'll tell you this. I mean, I think I would say this. The discipleship, even the 3D journey. I couldn't have done that in the first 4 years I was here, 5 years I was here. It's, once I've reached about 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, kind of built the relationship and the trust factor with the congregation. Like, okay, cause we had a, like, quote unquote, come to Jesus moment where I said, we either going to get busy about trying something new or we're just, we're busy living, busy dying kind of thing. Yeah. And I had put enough time in and build enough relationships and enough trust value that, okay, we hear you. If I'd have tried that in the first 5 years, they would have like, thanks, but no thanks.
Right. Yeah. And that's what, if you're going to make a difference somewhere, you got to stick around for a while. And, and that's one of the reasons why, I look at some of our mainline denominations, and I'm not going to name them because it's your podcast, not mine. But you look at mainline denominations, and they're struggling, and they have a model where we shove our guys around constantly and we play the shell game, and you're sitting there thinking, scratching your head like, he just started to get traction and you moved him to a new spot. And they say it takes about 7 years for your folks to trust you. And that, I'd say that's accurate.
Maybe longer in Northwest Pennsylvania.
Could be. Yeah.
Just kind of that pick yourself up by your bootstraps, the kind of independent frontier spirit that is in our area. And that's not bad about them. That's just that there's strong people who are self-reliant.
Yeah, they're going to make you earn it, and they should.
Yeah,
and I think you got to prove yourself to be 2 Timothy workman that's not ashamed of what he's doing, and you got to put yourself out there and chase it down, and really prove to the people that that you care about them.
And like as your guys' sheep, I'll say this, and you're talking about it being a high pain tolerance and developing the trust. I wouldn't be willing to go through this manual because we just talked about in, I think, a recent episode, like baptism is one commitment. Choosing to be a disciple is a whole nother commitment. Yeah. And I wouldn't be willing to do that if I didn't trust and your sermons didn't explain what was Jesus saying and why this is so important. Why is it such a must? And so as your sheep, I'm getting that, and I'm getting that trust, and I'm willing to like see what's on the other side of like the importance of being a disciple and how that pays dividends to every human that we encounter. So, good job.
Well, this isn't one of the questions we had pre-planned, but I'm interested. So what do you think about the bifurcation, the division between evangelism and discipleship?
Bifurcation.
The division, because everybody, let's go. They like evangelism's one thing and discipleship's another thing.
Is it?
Well, I would argue that it's not.
Yeah.
But for a long time, people, we're going to be good at evangelism. We're going to just evangelize, and then there's no discipleship after that.
Well, evangelized into what would be a question. So come to our church. It's fun. Who gives a rip what your church like? Are you going to talk to me about Jesus Christ and you're going to show me how to follow after him or not? And so really the reality is like evangelism has to have the end. Evangelism without discipleship is not biblical. Period.
I would agree.
Yeah, and so the goal is always a deeply committed disciple of Jesus Christ. Always, and
I think about the passage you were quoting. He didn't say, "Hey," he didn't show up on the shore and say, "Hey, believe in me." He said, "Follow me."
Right. Yeah, and I make the joke at our church that if you call yourself a follower of Christ, you might have to follow him from time to time, and so but it does carry that idea of like, my friend Tony. I have a good friend Tony. I consider him a mentor of mine. Actually, my son's middle name is Anthony because of this guy, and he walked a very dark road with me, and so I'm sitting in the chair I'm in today doing the work I'm doing today because Tony was in my life 10 years ago, and one of the things that he even said just recently was, if I have a timer to go off to pray and I don't pray, then I'm God in my life and not God, because I'm not doing the thing that he called me to do. I set that timer because I knew he wants me to stop what I'm doing and spend some time and pray, but I'm being God in my own life. And so, most people I see are God in their own life, and they're the ones who call the shots, and they're disciples of themselves, and I'm going to chase after my own things. And it just so happens that going to church is one of the things that I want, and so we find ourselves with, hopefully not y'all, and hopefully not me, but with churches with people in it that
the big church,
that want to sit and have the label of churchgoer, be able to check that box off and say, okay, I'm good with God, when the reality is they're their own God and they're following their own discipleship.
Yeah, that was one of the big things that Jason's been bringing up, which he keeps calling the big three. I don't know if he's mentioned in the podcast, but that, it's not going to church, reading your Bible and praying. Not that those aren't all important spiritual disciplines, but they're being a forgiver in this world, self-denying,
and living in unity.
And living in unity
with everybody.
Which I had said in a recent podcast that, being selfless was one of the hardest things for me, but I've been studying forgiveness and I'm like, oh, that's really hard too.
Yeah.
They're all super hard.
Yeah. And they're all three things that Jesus said you must do. He never said you must read the Bible, but he said you must forgive.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I mean, we've even run into that at our church too, where we canceled Sunday school one week so that we could have like a fellowship picnic type thing. The weather was getting nice, and we're like, hey, let's do a little get together. And I had someone kind of corner me at church after church Sunday morning and say, I don't see anywhere in the Bible where it says we should cancel Sunday school for a picnic. And I was like, can you show me Sunday school in the Bible? Just to begin with. Because I can show you where it says we should constantly break bread with one another. And that is just as important as sitting down to a class. And then like the nerd in me is like, do you know where Sunday school come from? I want to lay out all my knowledge, but it was, it's kind of those moments that you stop and think like, are we actually focused on the things that matter, or are we disciples of a different time period? Or are we disciples of a different pattern?
Yeah. So one of the debates we have around this table, or we've had around this table for a number of times, is what's the difference, the distinguishing difference? So there's 3 Ds: develop, display, deploy. Yeah. So the develop is, we got that. That's like learning all this stuff that Jesus told us to do, like learning how Jesus lived and trying to live and mimic what Jesus lived. But what's the difference? And so this is one of Hannah's favorite questions. Really, how do you see the difference between displaying and the deploying?
I'm still working on this too.
There's no difference. Next question.
Oh, yay! Someone else struggles, or like is like, what? These two are so correlated. You did have a good thing you said the other day. And sorry, Tom, to cut you off. But you said that the lighthouse is like the light shining out, and it's letting people alert, like, hey, I'm the safe spot that you need to get to. But deploy was that rescue swimmer who went out and grabbed the person on the boat to bring them back to the shoreline, which was good.
That's the idea is, because you see both concepts scripturally. So, of course, you're going to see it in your model here. But the idea is the world should be able to look at you and see that you're different. They will know you're my disciples by your love. Like, they should be able to look at you and see a difference. That doesn't mean they've experienced the love of Christ, or they've experienced the love that you have for them, but they can see the love that you have for one another and know that that you belong to Jesus. Like, and that's the idea. So of course, display lifestyle evangelism. I'm going to live my life in such a way that the world will know that I'm different. And then deploy, where I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to use my mouth to share the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because I think a lot of people are real comfortable with, I'll live my life according to biblical precept. And I can do that in front of my coworkers. But to sit down with a guy and say, do you understand why you're in the spot you're in, is because you don't have Jesus Christ in the background helping run your life. I can
relate to that. I'm that person.
Yeah.
Who's just like, I'm willing to display, but to go out and talk and bring up Jesus all the time. Yeah.
I have a friend who has a little saying, and I can't ever get it just right, but it's something about, we need to share the best message in the world with people, preach the best message we can, and if necessary, use words. And so he's very heavy on that lifestyle. Like, I'm just going to live, and people's going to see, and it's just going to, that's going to be my witness, and I'm never going to say anything.
Yeah, I can't be friends with your friend. No, I don't see that from a biblical point of view, that there is the necessity to say with your mouth. Like, no one's going to look necessarily at your behavior and say, can you lead me into the ways of life and Jesus Christ, and he died and crossed for me. Like, you're going to have to at some point say, Jesus has more for you than what you're giving yourself right now. And that's actually such a soft touch to get into an evangelistic conversation, because there's a lot of, you talk about a lot of the debates that our church has found itself in, say the same-sex marriage debate. I think if we lead with abomination, we lose people. If we lead with Jesus has more for you than what you're giving yourself, we have opened a door now to a deeper conversation. And
that line goes for anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
It goes for anything. It goes for, like, my friend who was addicted to bicycle riding. and bicycle riding was his idol, you know.
Yep.
And he came to this realization, like, racing bikes is my idol, and like he like sold all his bikes, and he won't even buy a bike and ride with his children now because that was his idol, you know. But you know, like, God wants more for you than you being a championship bicycle rider,
right?
You know, there's more, or whatever replaces God. And I think that's one of the things I've been struggling with, even thinking about, we've been talking about love quite a bit, is that God wants more for us than we want for ourselves. And as pastors, we want more for our people than many of them want for themselves. And that I've been struggling with that pain. Like, I want such good things for people I know, you know, and I know doing it God's way is so much better. And I take that hit. And then every time I take that kind of little hit on me, I'm reminded, oh, that's how God feels about how I'm acting today. You know, that kind of thing. Like, he wants better for me than I'm even wanting for myself.
Yeah, and I obviously, I'm going to daily give myself to something that God doesn't want from me. You know, and that's the reality. And, you know, I tell our church that too. Like, if you knew the guy that was preaching up here, you'd probably hold your kid tighter. You know, like, that's just the way it is, because you don't realize the sin that someone else is walking in, or the issues that someone else has to deal with, and the stuff that they carry. And, you know, the old saying of, if we all piled our problems on the floor, we'd pick our own back up pretty quick. You know, and because as much as it is a burden to carry our own stuff, the reality is it's not necessarily anything compared to someone else's weight. And so I think, and he's kind of especially equipped us to carry our own stuff. But yeah, that idea of, like, I wish I want more for me than I give myself to, and I want more for my people than they give themselves to, and that's part of the pain of discipleship. You know, is watching, like, man, if you could just get a hold of this, you'd not believe it.
Well, even going through this, I've learned how much I've just reminding myself weekly that I like what you said. You know, discipleship has a high pain tolerance. I'm learning how difficult actually being a disciple. It's all fun and games. Yeah, I love Jesus, I'm gonna follow Jesus, until you start looking at all this thing he wants for you and what that means, and loving your enemy, and all, you know, all these, being humble and all these things. You're like, holy man, that's tough.
Like, you wrote the skeleton of the manual, and you're still like, it's not for me.
It's tough.
No, it has to be.
Well, and that's, you know, I say it tongue in cheek, but it's pretty serious. Is one of the things, like, how many times someone in the church has felt comfortable enough to come tell me all the things they don't like about me, you know, and you just take that on the chin. Because it's like, okay, I can suffer through that. Like, it's, so you don't like something about me, that's okay. I kind of don't care for it myself, you know, but it's a part of my character, so sorry. You know? And you know, but there are a lot of things that just happen to a pastor, especially on the weekly, that it's like, man, that hurt. Oh, that hurt. You know, and you just kind of take those hits, like you said about, like, suffer for the Lord, you know, or, you know, but yeah, that's the way it goes. You know, the old joke, you only work one day a week. Yeah,
that's right.
And my comeback is, it's a 60-hour day.
60-hour day.
But that's reality. You know,
I believe
you
it.
don't see it.
For our develop step, we have there's action steps associated with each D, and so for develop, the action step is what we call cord groups. Jason, can you, like, explain or break down what a cord
group? A group of 3 or
group?
4 kind of meeting together, sharing life on a deeper level. That's kind of one of, you know.
And the other option are, like, community groups, which is like 8 to 12 people, which we have
general small group.
Which we have some of those meeting. And so I was just curious if there's anything set up like that in your church, and, like, if there is, how would that change the dynamic of church life?
There isn't. We tinkered around with it for a little bit, and it went pretty well. And then the moment in history happened
that we never
just
know the name that no one showed us.
And so that came through in the early 2000s, and kind of we had a few that the head fell away, and then a few that were sticking around, and it fell out. But something our church isn't huge. I mean, we're averaging about 140, somewhere in that ballpark, but still knowing our people well enough to pair them up on our own. So you know, and they might not even realize it. So if anyone from my church is watching this, I'm like, hey, hold on. But I'll pull them over and say, hey, have you met so and just kind of start to pull those relationships in and try and because I know them well enough to say they're going to jive. And then we have had where I've pulled some different people aside and said, these two people are like, you just run with your runners. You know what I mean? Like, these two people want to run, let's run with them. And it was two ladies, and I pulled one of our other ladies that's real mature in her faith, and I was like, will you run with them? You know, and then they kind of were able to disciple a little bit. And so we've kind of done it a la carte, you know, almost. But I would like to, I guess, ask you guys how that implementation went for you, so then I can learn and do it myself. And
well, we're doing it pretty organically similar. Right now, we're still in just the phase of talking about it, and you know, this is part of the. I mean, we're in the middle of this journey, and so we're going to talk about the biblical word koinonia, and what that word means, and how, like, there's a special word for love in the Bible, agape. You know, this is a special word, and there's a special word for community, the koinonia, and that's it's special for the church, and so we're going to talk about that. And
I think we had an episode about koinonia.
We may have already mentioned that, and so anyway, so we're in this process of getting people to think about it and talk about it. And we've got some started up, but we're kind of leaving it in that we want it to be organic and not a program.
Yeah, if you do it like, because we kicked around a bunch of ideas, like maybe we do this geographically where people live, and it's like, okay, but I'll drive 45 minutes to be with someone that I really connect with over a walk across the street to be with someone that I don't, you know. So it's not about distance. It's more, and we've got people. I don't know if you're seeing that, but we have people that connect with our church, and they'll drive 55 minutes to an hour to get to our place.
Oh yeah, I think we have some
because they connect with the family here, and that's just, you know, we talk about that all the time. This is a family. This is not. It's not a group of people that worship God in the same building. We are literally a family, which requires vulnerability, and it requires some surrender, and you're going to lay some of your preferences down, and you know.
As a person who's the churchgoer, for a way I think the cord groups can form, and is like you guys convincing us that it's worth it. Not that it's worth it, but that it's a part of becoming a follower of Jesus. You can't do it alone. Is like kind of encouraging that a lot. And that there's a benefit to going through life together with someone else. And like the core group I'm involved in, and my core group my husband's involved in, the meetings have been very rocky, like scheduling and so they're not these beautiful flowing things. I do think that they will grow. I mean, I kind of see them more like these flowers that start from a seed, the stem will grow up, and all these petals will bloom. But those relationships take a really long time. But yeah, just encouraging your churchgoers that fellowship is key.
Well, one final question, I guess. Are we done?
Yeah, go for it.
One final question.
Are you done?
Are you done?
Yeah. No. So is there anything in what you've heard from the podcast that's like really stuck with you? Like is there a takeaway, like this thing helped? Or maybe not.
No, it was one of them was koinonia, that idea that if we are getting together and having a meal together, that's not koinonia. If we sit down and Jesus is at the center of this in our conversations and in our thoughts and in the way that we structure ourselves, and we have a meal, Jesus being the centerpiece, then yes, that's koinonia. You know, the central element is Christ, because a lot of people are comfortable having a meal together. But then also just on that conversation of display and deploy, you know, I was in the gym, because usually that's where I throw my headphones in and catch as much as I can while I'm there, and it was that idea came up, and I was like, I never thought about how someone, like, obviously I saw that and I thought, okay, there's lifestyle evangelism, and then there's get out there and get your hands dirty. I didn't think that someone sitting out there would be like, this is the same thing. would have that difficulty of definition.
Yeah.
And so, I was like, how many things do I say that people are so confused by, but it's so clear to me, and so, I kind of wrestled through that a little bit, but, it's that sort of thing that, and I probably missed the second half of the podcast because I'm thinking about all the things I say that no one can think about, and let it play. But yeah, that, just from it, those two ideas actually were big ones that as you guys discussed through them that were really good.
That's 2/3 of the 3Ds, so that's good.
Hey, we'll take that.
All right, well, Tom, we really appreciate you coming on. It's been awesome having you. Yeah. So, anything else, Jason?
No, I'm good. I appreciate the friendship, the partnership. One of the things that I really like about our league, and I just kind of throw this last thing out there, is we're involved in something that I think is particularly special. And, we have a diverse group of pastors who have very diverse theology, but we're very kingdom-minded. Yeah. And I just kind of want to give a shout out to the Lord for that, because I think it is one of the most biblical, godly, and it challenges my own discipleship about how to be with people who are different than me, but live in unity. Right. And that unity is built around, who Christ is, who Jesus is. And that's a good thing, and I'm glad you're part of that. And I look forward to continuing to serve the Lord here in this area for some time yet.
Yeah, hopefully till you retire.
Yeah, until you get old and smelly.
That's right.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Our prayer is that you've heard something today that will help you be a better disciple of Jesus Christ. We also want to encourage you to make sure you take your next step in your discipleship journey by considering what it is you would do about what you heard today, and then go and do it. Finally, we want to invite you to join us at 10:30 on Sundays, either at our Main Street campus in downtown Clarion between Dunkin Donuts and McDonald's, or online at FBC Clarion.com. God bless.